Four homeless twin girls meet a millionaire CEO at Mom's grave. Their answer to his question makes him speechless. Daniel Ashton, a young white millionaire CEO, had it all: wealth, success, and the deep, unshakable love of his life, Emily. Their story was one that seemed woven from the threads of a perfect romance, a tale of whispered promises beneath starlit skies, laughter echoing through grand hallways, and a bond that only grew stronger with time. Emily was not just his wife, but his closest confidant, and the steady hand by his side in the boardroom, serving as his personal secretary at his vast, thriving corporation. To Daniel, she was the very heartbeat of his world, a constant source of light in the often cold corridors of corporate power. Their days were painted with stolen glances and tender touches, their nights with the warmth of each other's embrace. They shared dreams, building their empire side by side, each achievement sweeter, because they reached it together. Emily's love filled the vast mansion with a warmth that wealth alone could never buy. She had a way of turning even the quiet moments, a shared cup of coffee in the morning, or a simple walk through their private garden, into cherished memories. Then their world expanded with the birth of four beautiful twin baby girls, each a tiny miracle, a perfect blend of their shared love. As Emily held their daughters for the first time, Daniel's heart swelled with a happiness so profound it brought tears to his eyes. The soft, fluttering cries of their newborns filled the rooms that had once echoed only with their own voices, transforming their mansion into a true family home. The girls, identical yet unique in their own tiny ways, filled their days with wonder. Daniel would often find himself lost in their bright, curious eyes, seeing pieces of Emily reflected back at him, her kindness, her warmth, her unwavering spirit. Their home soon became a sanctuary of innocent giggles, baby-soft whispers, and the rhythmic patter of tiny feet learning to walk. Every morning, he woke to the gentle coos of his daughters and the radiant smile of his beloved wife. Emily's love wrapped around him like a comforting embrace, a steady reminder of the life they had chosen together. Sometimes, as he watched Emily play with their daughters, her soft, melodic laughter blending with the girls' delighted squeals, he felt his heart tighten with gratitude, wondering how he had ever managed a day without her. Life, it seemed, had given him everything: a thriving empire, a beautiful, devoted wife, and four precious daughters who had already begun to fill his world with their boundless energy and innocence. In these moments, Daniel felt invincible, wrapped in the love of his family, believing that no storm could ever darken the bright, joyful life they had built together. One bright morning, as the golden fingers of dawn stretched across the sky, Daniel awoke with a sense of adventure pulsing through his veins. Memories of the early days of his love with Emily danced through his mind. Those carefree, spontaneous road trips, the stolen kisses by moonlit lakes, the laughter that echoed against the wind as they raced down endless highways. He missed those days, the moments when it was just the two of them against the world, before their lives had filled with the joyful chaos of four baby girls. As he watched the first rays of sunlight catch in Emily's hair as she cradled one of their daughters by the window, her profile framed by the soft, warm glow, he felt a deep longing to reclaim that closeness. "Emily," he whispered, his voice low but filled with the spark of an idea. "What if we took a break, just you and me?" His words hung in the air between them, a gentle challenge, a reminder of the lovers they had once been. Emily turned to face him, her eyes bright but cautious, the weight of motherhood already settling into her soul. She glanced down at the tiny face nestled against her shoulder, the soft, rhythmic breaths of their daughter a comforting reminder of the life they had built. "Daniel," she replied, her voice tinged with a mother's gentle worry. "Our girls are so small, they need us. How can I relax, knowing they're here without us?" He moved closer, placing his hands gently on her shoulders, his thumbs tracing slow, reassuring circles. "That's why we have Martha," he whispered, leaning in until his forehead touched hers, their breaths mingling. She loves them. She knows their every need, every tiny hiccup, every sleepy yawn. She has been their guardian angel, just like she was for us when we first brought them home. I promise you, they will be safe, loved, and cared for. Emily's heart fluttered, caught between her instincts as a mother and the yearning for the carefree days when their love felt like a summer storm, fierce, passionate, and untamed. She closed her eyes, letting his warmth envelop her, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. In that moment, she allowed herself to remember. The wind in her hair, the rush of his laughter, the thrill of stolen time together. She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around his. "All right," she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and excitement. "But promise me, Daniel. Promise me our little girls will always know how deeply we love them, even when we're miles away." Daniel's heart swelled, his chest tightening with a love so fierce it nearly stole his breath. He pulled her closer, pressing his lips gently against her temple. "I promise," he whispered, sealing their decision with a kiss. "We will come back to them, and our love will be all the stronger for it." As the morning stretched into afternoon, Emily found herself packing a small suitcase, her heart fluttering with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. She carefully selected her favorite summer dresses, the ones Daniel always said made her eyes shine like the sea at sunrise. She folded each piece with care, slipping in a photo of their daughters, their bright eyes and chubby cheeks captured in a moment of pure, unfiltered joy. She paused, her fingers lingering over the picture, her heart tightening. Could she really leave them, even for a few days? Martha entered the room quietly, her kind eyes understanding. "Don't worry, Miss Emily," she whispered, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I will take care of them as if they were my own. You go, make memories with Mr. Ashton. They will need those stories one day." Emily forced a smile, feeling the warmth of Martha's words settle over her like a comforting blanket. She gave the older woman a grateful nod before zipping the suitcase closed. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the marble floors of their mansion, Daniel took Emily's hand and led her to the car. He opened the door for her, his eyes twinkling with the promise of adventure. She slid into the passenger seat, her heart thudding with a mixture of fear and excitement. He slipped behind the wheel, the engine purring to life beneath them, and as they pulled away from the driveway, Emily looked back one last time, catching a glimpse of their 4 daughters waving from the nursery window, their tiny hands pressed against the glass, unaware of the storm that fate had begun to stir. The road twisted and turned like a serpent through the lush, mist-covered hills, the sun now dipping behind the mountains, casting long, foreboding shadows over the winding path. Daniel's hands gripped the leather steering wheel, his knuckles white as he guided their sleek, midnight black car along the curves, the tires whispering against the asphalt. Emily sat beside him, her hair flowing like a golden river in the breeze, her laughter still echoing softly from a shared memory just moments before. She reached for his hand, her slender fingers intertwining with his, her wedding ring catching a final glint of sunlight, a bright flash against the growing gloom. She turned her head, her eyes meeting his for a heartbeat, the unspoken bond between them as strong as ever, a promise of forever, a silent vow that no distance, no time could break. But fate, ever the cruel sculptor of lives, had already cast its dark shadow over them. As they rounded a sharp bend, the distant roar of an engine broke through the tranquil sounds of nature, a low, menacing growl that grew louder, closer, more threatening. In an instant, a truck, its lights blinding and its horn screaming into the twilight, swerved into their lane, its driver a reckless force of chaos and speed. Daniel's reflexes, sharp from years of calculated business maneuvers but untested in this sudden battle for survival, kicked in. He slammed his foot onto the brake, the car skidding sideways, tires shrieking in protest, smoke rising in desperate tendrils as rubber met unforgiving road. Time stretched and twisted around them, seconds bleeding into one another, every heartbeat a thunderous drumbeat of fear. Emily's scream cut through the air, a pure, primal cry of terror that sliced into Daniel's soul, shattering the fragile calm that had once wrapped around their lives. He felt the impact before he fully registered the sight. The truck's steel frame smashing into the side of their car, metal crumpling like paper, glass exploding into 1,000 shimmering fragments, slicing through the soft leather of the seats, the warmth of their skin, the fragile illusion of safety. The force of the collision sent their car spinning, weightless for a sickening moment, before it crashed through the flimsy roadside barrier, the metal rails snapping like dry twigs beneath the weight of their spiraling descent. The world outside the shattered windows became a chaotic blur of spinning trees, jagged rocks, and flashing lights, a violent ballet of destruction. The car rolled and rolled, each turn a bone-crushing, breath-stealing twist of fate, until it finally came to rest at the bottom of the steep embankment, its engine hissing, steam rising from the crumpled hood like the final breath of a wounded beast. Inside, the silence was deafening. The air was thick with the sharp, metallic scent of blood, the acrid bite of leaking fuel, the bitter tang of burned rubber. Daniel's head lolled to the side, blood trickling from a deep gash above his brow, his chest heaving with the shallow, irregular breaths of a body on the edge of breaking. His vision swam, the world around him a twisted, nightmarish haze of shattered glass and twisted metal. His fingers twitched, reaching blindly for Emily, for the warmth of her hand, for the comforting, steady pulse of the woman who had become his entire world. But his hand met only the cold, unyielding leather of the shattered seat beside him. Emily's body lay limp, her golden hair matted with blood, her delicate frame twisted at an unnatural angle, her once vibrant eyes staring sightlessly into the gathering darkness. In that moment, her life, their life, ended in a cruel, unforgiving instant, the fragile thread of her existence cut by the brutal, unfeeling hands of fate. Daniel's heart, broken and bleeding, beat a slow, agonizing rhythm in his chest, each thud a cruel reminder of the life slipping away beside him. His mind, foggy and drifting toward the encroaching blackness, clung to her name, a final, desperate whisper that escaped his cracked lips as the darkness closed in around him. Emily! And then, nothing. The world fell silent, the mountains absorbing the final echoes of metal on stone, the last whispers of a love story shattered against the unforgiving earth. Above, the stars blinked into existence, indifferent witnesses to the tragedy below, their cold, distant light falling upon the twisted wreckage that now cradled the remnants of a once perfect love. Back at the grand mansion, now echoing with the whispers of absence and the soft cries of 4 motherless infants, Martha moved through the halls with a quiet determination. She had always been more than just a maid. She was the steady presence in the Ashton household, the watchful eye that never missed a single tear or smile. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the shadow of loss hung heavily over the home, but Martha refused to let it consume the tiny, fragile lives entrusted to her care. Each morning, she would rise before the sun, her calloused hands preparing warm bottles and soft blankets, her weary feet padding quietly into the nursery, where the 4 girls stirred in their cribs, their tiny fists opening and closing in search of comfort. She whispered their names, little melodies of hope in the otherwise silent mansion, as she cradled them, their small heads resting against her chest, their breath soft and steady against her heart. She sang to them, her voice carrying the lullabies their mother would never sing, her tone a bittersweet blend of comfort and loss. When the girls first learned to smile, it was Martha's wrinkled face they reached for, her eyes they searched for approval, her arms they trusted for warmth and safety. She felt their first teeth break through, wiped away their first tears, and cheered their first stumbling steps across the polished marble floors. In those moments, she became more than just a caretaker. She became their world, their protector, their second mother. As the seasons changed outside, so too did the girls within the walls of the mansion. Their first words were whispered to Martha in the quiet of the nursery, their tiny hands clutching at her apron as they learned to stand, to walk, to run. She taught them their colors, their numbers, their prayers at bedtime. She celebrated their birthdays with makeshift cakes baked late at night, their tops lopsided but decorated with love, the flickering candles reflecting the hopeful glow in Martha's tired eyes. She braided their hair, dressed them in the tiny, frilly dresses their mother had lovingly picked out before her tragic end, and watched as they grew into bright, curious toddlers, their laughter filling the once silent halls with a life that had nearly been snuffed out. Yet in the quiet moments, when the girls drifted off to sleep, their breath soft and rhythmic, Martha would sit by their bedsides, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes closed against the sting of unshed tears. She would whisper to the shadows, to the lingering spirit of Emily, promising that she would keep the girls safe, that she would love them with a fierce, unbreakable devotion, that she would never let them feel the ache of their loss. She never let herself wonder too deeply about Daniel, the broken father who had vanished into the abyss of tragedy. To her, he was a ghost, a memory, a name whispered only in prayers and dreams, his fate as uncertain as the future she now carried on her tired, steadfast shoulders. As the years slipped by, the girls began to ask questions, small, innocent probes into the life they never truly knew. "Where is Mommy?" one would ask, her tiny hand reaching for Martha's worn, calloused fingers. "Why don't we have a daddy?" another would whisper, her eyes wide and bright, reflecting the flickering firelight that danced across the nursery walls. Each question was a dagger to Martha's weary heart, a cruel reminder of the loss she could never fully explain. She would gather them into her lap, their small bodies warm and trusting against her chest, and whisper the same carefully chosen words each time. "Your mother was an angel," she would say, her voice steady but her heart trembling. "She watches over you from the heavens and she loves you with all her heart. As for your father—" She would pause, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes lifting to the ceiling as if seeking answers from a God who had taken so much from them. "He is out there, somewhere, loving you from afar." Martha never let them see her tears, never let them sense the deep, aching hole in her heart where her own dreams had once lived. She poured every ounce of herself into their upbringing, her love, a fierce, unbreakable force that shielded them from the harshness of the world outside their mansion's gates. She became their teacher, their protector, their guide through a world they had never truly understood, a world that had taken so much from them before they had even learned to speak. And as the years continued their relentless march forward, Martha prayed that one day, somehow, the broken pieces of their shattered family might find their way back together, that the daughters she had grown to love as her own might finally know the warmth of their father's embrace, the strength of his arms around them, the steady, unbreakable bond of a family made whole once more. Years had slipped by like the pages of a forgotten book, each one marked by first words, first steps, and countless bedtime stories whispered in the soft glow of nursery lamps. The once fragile infants had grown into 4 vibrant, beautiful young girls, their eyes bright with curiosity, their laughter echoing through the grand halls of the mansion like the long-lost melody of their mother's voice. Martha, their steadfast guardian, had watched with pride as they transformed from swaddled newborns into confident, spirited children. Yet beneath the joy of their everyday lives, a question had slowly grown, a silent, ever-present shadow that clung to the edges of their innocence, the mystery of their mother, the woman they had never known but felt deeply in the quiet of their heart. It was on a crisp autumn morning, as the leaves whispered secrets to the wind and the air carried the faint, bittersweet scent of change, that Martha found herself standing in the kitchen, her hands wringing the edge of her apron as she gathered the courage to finally bridge the gap between past and present. She watched the girls from the doorway as they chased each other through the garden, their giggles rising like the chirping of songbirds, their hair flowing behind them like the banners of a forgotten era. She felt a pang in her heart, a sharp, aching reminder of the promise she had made to their lost mother, to never let them forget the love that had once filled this house. Clearing her throat, she stepped into the morning light, her shadow stretching long across the cobblestones. "Girls," she called, her voice both firm and gentle, the way only a mother's could be, even if she wore that title unofficially. They turned to her in unison, their bright, curious eyes catching the morning sun, and for a fleeting moment she saw Emily in each of their faces, the same delicate curves of their cheeks, the same hopeful sparkle in their eyes. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the years settle upon her shoulders. "Would you like to visit your mother's grave?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, the words heavy with years of unspoken sorrow and unfulfilled promises. The girls froze, their playful shrieks dying in their throats, replaced by a profound, breathless silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. They glanced at each other, their eyes wide and filled with a mix of surprise, longing, and fear. For all their young lives, the concept of a mother had been a distant, hazy dream, a whispered memory in the rustling leaves, a gentle presence in Martha's nightly prayers, a soft warmth in the lullabies that had cradled them to sleep. But now, the idea of visiting her grave made the loss real, tangible, a truth that could no longer be softened by the passage of time. "Yes," one of them whispered, her small, trembling hand finding Martha's rough, work-worn fingers. The others quickly joined in, their voices rising in a nervous, eager chorus. "Yes, we want to see her," they said, their hearts already beginning to ache with the weight of the unknown. Martha felt a tear slip down her cheek, its path warm against her cold, weathered skin. She reached out, pulling them into her arms, feeling their tiny bodies press against her, their breaths warm against her neck as they clung to her, their surrogate mother, the only family they had ever truly known. Later that morning, Martha dressed them in their finest white dresses, the ones with the tiny lace collars that Emily had chosen so lovingly before her tragic end. She brushed their hair, tied their ribbons, and slipped polished shoes onto their small, restless feet. She watched as they clutched the fresh flowers she had picked from the garden, their fingers tightening around the fragile stems as if clinging to the last remnants of innocence before facing a reality they had long been shielded from. As they stepped out into the cool morning air, the gravel crunching beneath their polished shoes, Martha felt the weight of 1,000 memories pressing down on her, each step toward the cemetery a painful reminder of the promises she had kept, the sacrifices she had made. The wrought iron gates loomed ahead, their twisted, ornate bars like the skeletal fingers of fate reaching out to embrace them. She paused for a moment at the threshold, her heart racing, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps as she struggled to find the strength to take that final step. With a deep, shuddering breath, she pushed open the gates, the rusty hinges screaming in protest, their cries echoing through the silent, mist-filled rows of gravestones. The girls hesitated, their wide eyes darting from one weathered stone to the next, their small hands tightening around Martha's skirt as they pressed close to her sides. She led them slowly down the narrow path, her footsteps faltering as she approached the familiar, polished marble headstone that bore the name of the woman she had loved like a sister, the woman she had promised to honor with every breath, every heartbeat, every sacrifice. "Here," she whispered, her voice breaking as she released their hands, her trembling fingers tracing the engraved letters on the cold, unyielding stone. "Here is your mother." The girls knelt beside the grave, their tears falling silently onto the fresh, dew-covered grass, their tiny voices whispering words of love and loss to the mother they had never known but had always, somehow, felt in the deepest corners of their hearts. The air in the cemetery hung thick with the weight of memories and the silent whispers of those long departed, the morning mist clinging to the grey headstones like the last breath of ghosts. Daniel's steps were slow and uncertain as he moved down the narrow, gravel-strewn path, his legs still weak from the years spent in a hospital bed, his heart heavier than the polished marble stones around him. He clutched a single white rose, its petals as soft and pure as the love he had once shared with Emily, his mind a storm of regrets and whispered prayers. He had awakened from his long, dreamless sleep into a world that felt colder, emptier, a life robbed of its light and warmth. Each step toward his wife's grave felt like a slow descent into the abyss of his own broken heart, the final, irreversible acknowledgement of a loss he had once been too weak to bear. As he reached the familiar headstone, polished to a flawless sheen despite the years, he sank to his knees, his body trembling with the effort, his fingers tracing the delicate engraved letters of her name, Emily Ashton, each stroke a painful reminder of the love he had lost, the life that had slipped through his grasp. The cool stone felt like ice beneath his touch, its unyielding surface a stark contrast to the warmth of the woman it memorialized. He closed his eyes, his lips moving in silent, broken whispers, each word a fragile thread of connection to the woman who had once been his everything. "I'm sorry, Emily," he choked out, his voice raw and fractured, the sound of a man shattered by grief. "I should have been there. I should have protected you." The wind rustled through the tall, weathered trees that lined the cemetery's perimeter, their branches swaying gently like the arms of mourners swathed in black. Daniel's shoulders shook with silent sobs, the rose clutched tightly in his fist, its stem bending beneath the pressure, the delicate petals trembling in his unsteady grip. He felt the sting of tears against his weathered cheeks, the first he had shed since his awakening, his heart finally breaking through the numbness that had held it captive for so long. His whispered confessions filled the air around him, carried away on the chill autumn breeze, lost among the rustling leaves and the distant cries of mourning birds. Then he heard it, the soft, uncertain rustle of footsteps against the gravel behind him, the faint, childlike murmurs of voices so pure, so innocent, they cut through his grief like the first light of dawn breaking over a dark, storm-tossed. "See!" He froze, his breath catching in his throat, his heart racing with a strange, forgotten hope. Slowly, he turned, his knees creaking in protest, the rose slipping from his grasp to land softly at the base of the headstone, its petals spreading like the last, whispered memory of a love once shared. His eyes, still blurred with tears, struggled to focus on the figures before him. 4 small, delicate forms, their white dresses fluttering in the cool morning breeze, their wide, curious eyes reflecting the soft, diffused light of the rising sun. His breath caught in his chest, his mind reeling with disbelief, his heart pounding so loudly in his ears he thought it might burst. 4 pairs of eyes met his, bright, clear, and so achingly familiar, the same deep, soulful blue as the woman he had lost. They stared back at him, their expressions a blend of wonder and hesitation, their small hands clutching fresh flowers, their faces framed by the same golden hair that had once flowed so freely around Emily's shoulders. Time seemed to stand still, the world around him fading into a muted, distant hum as he took in the sight of them, his daughters, his precious, long-lost children, the very embodiment of the love he had thought forever stolen from him. His lips trembled, his mind struggling to form words, his voice emerging as a hoarse, broken whisper, choked with disbelief and a fierce, desperate longing. Do you know who I am?" he asked, his words hanging in the air like a prayer, his heart caught between hope and despair. The girls exchanged quick, uncertain glances, their small fingers tightening around each other's, their breaths coming in short, shallow gasps as they sensed the weight of the moment, the magnitude of the stranger's question. Finally, one of them, the smallest, her eyes the brightest, her tiny chin lifted with a courage that belied her years. Stepped forward, her soft, childish voice cutting through the morning chill like a shard of glass through silk. "Are you the angel who visits our mother every year?" she asked, her innocent, wide-eyed gaze piercing straight into Daniel's shattered heart, the simple, heartbreaking question knocking the breath from his lungs. Daniel felt his legs give way beneath him, his body collapsing against the cool, unforgiving stone of his wife's grave, his hands trembling as he reached out for the small, delicate hand that now extended toward him. His fingers closed around hers, the warmth of her touch searing through his skin, igniting a fire in his chest that he had thought long extinguished. Tears streamed down his face, hot and unrelenting, each one a silent apology, a whispered promise to the daughters he had unknowingly abandoned, the family he had nearly lost forever. In that moment, as the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting long, golden rays over the grieving father and his 4 angelic daughters, Daniel felt his heart begin to heal, the shattered fragments of his soul slowly piecing themselves back together in the soft, forgiving light of their innocent, unwavering love. As they left the cemetery, Daniel's mind swirled with a flood of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a bittersweet, aching joy that tugged at the edges of his once broken heart. The gentle, rhythmic crunch of gravel under their feet filled the silence, each step echoing the slow, tentative mending of the shattered bonds between a father and his long-lost daughters. He glanced down at the 4 little girls walking beside him, their small hands now firmly gripping his, their bright eyes filled with a mixture of awe and wonder, their innocent faces still etched with the faint lines of tears shed at their mother's grave. As they reached the mansion, its towering, ivy-covered walls bathed in the soft, golden light of the setting sun, Daniel paused at the threshold, his breath catching in his throat as he took in the sight of his once empty home, now alive with the sounds of laughter, the patter of small feet, and the quiet, nurturing presence of the woman who had become the heart and soul of this broken family. Martha stood just inside the doorway, her face lined with years of quiet sacrifice, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and relief as she watched the family she had held together through the darkest of times finally reunite. She reached out as the girls rushed toward her, their small bodies crashing into her legs, their arms wrapping tightly around her waist as they babbled excitedly about their mysterious encounter with the angel at their mother's grave. Daniel watched this scene with a heart so full it felt as if it might burst, his eyes misting over as he stepped forward, his once unsteady legs growing stronger with each determined stride. He reached for Martha's hand, his fingers trembling as they closed around hers, their calloused, work-worn textures fitting together like 2 pieces of a long-forgotten puzzle. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes locked on hers as the weight of his words hung in the air between them. "Thank you for being their mother, for giving them the love and care I couldn't, for keeping my family together when I was too broken to do so myself." Martha's breath caught in her throat, her eyes filling with fresh tears as she met his gaze, her heart swelling with a deep, unspoken love that had grown quietly, patiently, through years of whispered bedtime stories, scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks. She felt the warmth of his touch, the sincerity of his words, and in that moment, the years of loneliness and unspoken longing melted away, leaving only the pure, unbreakable bond that had formed between them. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Daniel slowly found his place in this new, unfamiliar world, a world where he was not just a grieving widower, but a father, a protector, and a man with a second chance at happiness. He spent his mornings walking his daughters to the garden, their tiny hands clasped tightly in his as they explored the blooming roses, chased butterflies, and whispered secrets to the statues that lined the winding paths. He spent his evenings reading them stories by the crackling fire, his voice growing stronger with each passing day, his heart mending with each soft, sleepy sigh as they drifted off in his arms. Through it all, Martha remained by his side, her presence a constant, steadying force, her quiet strength the foundation upon which their new family was built. She cooked their meals, tended their wounds, and whispered words of encouragement when the weight of grief threatened to pull them under once more. She became his confidant, his partner, the steady heartbeat of a household that had once echoed with the hollow sound of loss. And as the seasons changed, as the snow melted into the bright, hopeful greens of spring, Daniel found himself looking at Martha not just as a caretaker, but as a woman whose love had saved his daughters, whose patience had healed his broken heart, whose quiet, unspoken devotion had brought light back into his once dark world. One warm, sunlit morning, as the birds sang in the blossoming cherry trees and the girls danced through the garden in their matching white dresses, Daniel took Martha's hand and led her to the old stone bench beneath the sprawling oak tree, its branches heavy with the memories of long, forgotten summers. He knelt before her, his heart racing, his breath coming in short, nervous gasps as he searched her eyes for the strength to say the words that had been building in his heart for so long. "Martha," he began, his voice trembling, but his eyes steady, filled with a fierce, unwavering love. "You have been more than just a caretaker. You have been my daughter's mother, my anchor, my friend. You have given me a second chance at happiness, a chance to be the man and father I was always meant to be. I cannot imagine this life, this family, this home without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Martha's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat as the full weight of his words sank in, her heart swelling with a joy so pure, so unexpected it brought fresh tears to her eyes. She reached for his face, her trembling fingers brushing the stubble along his jaw, her lips breaking into a smile so bright, so full of life, it seemed to banish the last, lingering shadows of grief that clung to the corners of their world. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, her eyes never leaving his, as the girls, their small, delighted cries rising like the songs of mourning doves, rushed to embrace them, their tiny arms wrapping around their father and their soon-to-be mother in a joyous, tear-streaked embrace. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long golden rays across the blossoming garden, Daniel and Martha held each other close, their hearts beating in perfect, unbreakable harmony. A family, at last, made whole.